Hey, y'all, this is Hogan Gidley with the Tank Podcast. Today, Chad Wolf and I will sit down with former administrator to the Small Business Administration under President Donald Trump and chairman of the board for AFPI, the great, the incomparable, the wonderful Miss Linda McMahon. Welcome to the Tank.
Coming to you from our nation's capital, this is The Tank, your voice in Washington, D.C. and around the country. Broadcasting from the America First Policy Institute offices in D.C., this is the premier think tank podcast where we discuss the challenges facing our nation, talk policy, and advance America First solutions. Welcome to The Tank.
Hello, this is Chad Wolf.
And this is Hogan Gidley.
Coming up, we're going to sit down with Linda McMahon, but first, Hogan and I are going to cover off on a couple of issues that the American people are talking about.
That's right, Chad. And there are a lot of things going on in this country that people are quite concerned about. And I want to start here. The former president of the United States, Donald Trump, is facing 91 charges in total after several indictments have gone down around the country in Georgia and New York and D.C. And I think people are starting to understand and get what this actually is. 77% of Americans believe that these are politically motivated attacks, that they're not prosecutions, but instead they are persecutions. And it's beginning to become evident when you see the juxtaposition of not just who a weaponized government prosecutes, but who they protect. This is where I think most people are getting a wake-up call in this country when they're seeing what's going on. One man is protected, one man isn't. But I also want to say it's not necessarily just about the Biden administration's chief political rival, of course. It has to do with more than that. The American people are being targeted by a weaponized government, by three-letter agencies, simply for, liking the wrong tweet or downloading the wrong podcast. Podcast. You see what I did there?
I see where you're going.
But also for taking the wrong position. I mean, we have parents across this country being arrested for standing outside of abortion clinics, standing up for life. We have parents at school boards caring about their child's curriculum, their education, getting arrested there as well. And this has become such a big issue in this country that you can't help but acknowledge the fact that this government, for whatever reason, is really targeting people that disagrees with them. And the tip of that spear, obviously, is the former president of the United States. He went down to Georgia this week. He takes a mugshot, which, of course, is, look, say what you will about the picture, which I'm sure we can talk about, but talk about, exacting some type of revenge. You take mugshots so that people know who you are, so you can't just leave the country. Everyone knows who Donald Trump is. He's done several of these indictments so far. No mugshot needed at the little hearings, but they did it here to try and smear him in a way, I think, that's unnecessary. But it's so funny the way it's been used from so many people on the right to kind of not just martyr him, but expose what we're talking about here, which is the weaponization of government.
I think it's an unfortunate example, but when you punch the swamp and the establishment in the face, as the former president did for all 5 years, I would say, into the campaign and then the 4 years in office, they're going to punch back.
Right.
And they're punching back, and they're doing it with all their force. But I think the American people are seeing through this, and you not only have to just look at poll numbers and a few other things, they don't believe what's going on out there because, one phrase is, you hear people say they overplayed their hand, right? Okay, it's one thing if you want to, you have some issues with how classified documents are stored. Okay, that's it's a legitimate issue to be concerned about. Now, we can talk about how every other president has been done very similar things and not prosecuted. But some of these other things, when we talk about New York and Atlanta and all this other stuff, I think the American people are like, enough's enough. Like, you went after this man for this long, and now you've taken unprecedented steps. You're using legal theories that have never been tested before to go after someone you do not like. And I think that's where we are. And so when you talk about this two system of justice and you talk about the politicization of it, right? And you talk about, look at Georgia, right? When you have the prosecutor announcing her reelection, I think a week before, she's asking for a trial date the day before Super Tuesday, right? These aren't coincidence.
She also had like new glossy photos taken and put up a new website just before.
These are not
had
coincidence.
A fundraising
These are things that are strategically thought about and planned out. And so the American people shouldn't be, kind of duped into, oh, this just kind of all happens. No. It all happens because it's planned out in advance. And that's not a cynical view. I don't think it's not cynical. I think it's the reality that we're in right now. And again, I go back to this word precedent. This is setting a very dangerous precedent here in the United States where we've never seen this before. And the left has got to know that, isn't a threat. The left's got to know their term will come. And that's what concerns me is where does this stop?
Where does it go? Where does it stop? That's a great point to make. And you hit on a couple things there. The documents, for example, about you can have some qualms about how people store documents. But that's what I was saying with like the real-time juxtaposition. The former president had documents, raid Mar-a-Lago. Joe Biden, documents, that's fine. We got tipped off, reports showed all this, and then they kind of cleared it out and it was all okay. You also hit on a word about the reality of this is starting to set in. It's a dark reality where I'm concerned about where the future goes here. I will say, I think some of the things we're talking about, while to us seem just egregious and obvious, I don't know how much of that trickles down to regular Americans. What they do see, and I think it's obvious, is that these citizens are being attacked by the government. Their own constitutional rights are being threatened here, and it's all in an effort to gain and maintain political power, which I believe the left does, with impunity all of the time, because that's what they want. And the only way to do that is to silence or censor or shut down any dissent. You talked about the swamp earlier, and I think the former president did a good job draining the swamp. However, the swamp's deep, and there are a lot of bottom feeders down there in the mud. And like you said, they punch back. They're pretty angry because they got exposed. And the more and more information comes out, you think about, as I mentioned, not just the prosecution of one person, but the protection of another. The mainstream media is egregious, and there's a reason their popularity, and trust sits somewhere between Congress and COVID. It's because from June 8th to July 18th, they spent 527 minutes talking about Donald Trump and indictments, and 0 minutes talking about the work of the majority in Congress on Joe Biden and Hunter Biden's issues. It blows my mind we're not having a bigger conversation about that.
Well, absolutely. I mean, I think for those of us that served all 4 years in the Trump administration, I mean, we were repeatedly told over and over again how that administration was the most corrupt in American history. None of that panned out. None of it was true. And yet you have verifiable information that actually tells you how corrupt the former vice president was while he was in office. With the China, with all the bank transactions, and to have that glossed over by, I'm not going to call them the Main Street media, the traditional media,
right?
Because I think they're no longer mainstream anymore. I think it's a disservice, but the American people are catching on. Maybe it's not as fast as some of us would like, but the fact that you've got these traditional media outlets that are no longer pulling down, they have the subscribership or the viewership that they once had. I think people are seeing through that.
Yeah, and they should. Look, you're talking about thanks to the work of Jim Comer and others in Congress, we now know for a fact there were 21 shell companies, $20+ million funneled to the family, more than 200 suspicious activity reports filed by banks. You're talking WhatsApp messages, text messages. Now we find out the sitting president used a pseudonym, 3 different fake names to do emails that had to do with Ukraine. When policy was being made with the Obama administration about Ukraine, they were coinciding with messages back and forth. It's a real problem.
And the reason that is important is it goes back to what you were talking about earlier, Hogan, is that 2-tier system of justice.
Right.
It's not that we want to continue to talk about this because, we dislike the president or his son or anything. It's there are real issues at play here. And if we're going to talk about how do we drive the country forward and get it back to focusing on what's right on policy, then let's have an equal playing field there. So if you're going to go after, one former president for X, you actually got to look at what's going on, with the current president while he was vice president specifically. I think there's a basic issue of fairness that the American people inherently know. They can feel it and they can see it. And this doesn't feel right to them.
It shouldn't, for the reasons you just outlined. But I mean, we went on a 3.5 year, fishing expedition based on no real evidence that we now know the 3-letter agencies knew was false to try and smear a guy we worked for, a former president. And now we actually have real information on a current president, and they're not looking into it. That, if the press was curious at all, which is what they're supposed to be. I'm a reformed journalist myself. You'd want to have that information. If you told me years ago, hey, I got this phone call, I got this text message that says X, I got these suspicious bank reports, I've got 21 shell companies, I'd be like, yes, I'm running it. That is amazing. Let me verify it and do it. They don't even talk about it. That's what's so frustrating, I think, for the right. But I will say, when this whole thing begins to get litigated more in the public, I do think it's going to be a problem eventually.
Yeah, I think that's right. And look, you're frustrated on that issue. I'll give you another issue that I continue to be frustrated on, and that is our wide open border.
No, wait, I was told it was closed. The Biden administration told me it was closed. Well, is that not right?
No, that's actually the opposite of what's going on down there. And again, we are 27 months into this administration. And you would think at some point they would recognize we've got a problem. Our strategy is broken. Let's shift. And I'm going to give President Trump credit. We actually saw this during his time. 2018, we had a crisis. Our strategy was not working, and we shifted and to get it under control. Now, I think you can argue that they don't want to get it under control. So there's that. But I think some of the latest reporting that we see is we now see an Uzbekistan individual on the border, trafficking, smuggling individuals across that border. Not the Uzbekistan border, but the U.S. southern border, to be clear, trafficking individuals across that border. When you have an ISIS-related individual doing this, you've got a problem. And the fact that this administration will not change tactics, will not change strategy, we talk a lot about putting the American people last. I can't think of anything more specific than putting the American people last and putting the interest of illegal aliens, foreign nationals, and the cartels first.
Yeah, but I think that's all horrible. But I think the American people need to understand what we're talking about here. You have hundreds of individuals now on the terror watch list coming into this country across that border. Thousands, tens of thousands of gotaways. We don't know who they are. So where do you think, But
so let's just talk about that for a minute, because I agree with you. You've gotten over 225 known or suspected terrorists coming across that border, what we call KSTs, known or suspected terrorists. These are individuals that are known to the U.S. government, that are bad enough to be either surveilled or somehow make their way onto numerous U.S. government watch list. That's how you become a known or suspected terrorist. And the fact that
They're not unknown.
they're
They're known.
but the fact that they somehow believe that, hey guys, I think we can get across the southern border is just it's amazing that they have decided that now is the time. And people are like, well, why is that? Well, it's not rocket science, right? And again, these are just the ones that we're catching. You got to think about the 2 or 3 million known gotaways that have gotten away and how many KSTs are in that. So you've got a real security situation happening along that border. We talk a lot about the humanitarian crisis and the human trafficking and the child sex trafficking. It's all terrible, all of it. But this is really when bad things can happen.
But here, no question. Here's the thing that makes me so angry, but also so scared. They don't care. And I'm sorry, but they don't. Because if you're working to cut a deal with Iran to give them $6 billion, the pallets of cash we talked about before, and the administration admits they're probably going to use that for proxies, for terrorism acts, et cetera, et cetera. And then you have known terrorists, suspected terrorists coming across the southern border. If you're not doing anything to stop it, what do you call that? You know this is an issue. You know the potential is there. And I am praying that one of these people doesn't get loose and do something to hurt American citizens. And you look around, and much like a crime committed by someone who's in this country illegally, it's 100% preventable.
Absolutely.
That's what's so frustrating.
And I think you go back to, the botched withdrawal from Afghanistan, and you had a senior member of the military, I think it was 6 or 8 months later, testifying before Congress, and he said, look, Al-Qaeda and other terrorist cells could reconstitute themselves in a matter of under a year back in Afghanistan. And once that happens, then how they export that across the world back to the United States, back to Mexico. I'm not saying that's happening, but the possibility and the potential is there more so now than I would say any time since 9/11. And that's what people need to really be concerned about. This is not about you need to help the women and children coming across the border. Of course, you want to make sure that they're protected. But what the job is of those Border Patrol agents, their primary job is not to protect women and children coming across the border. It's just not. It's to make sure that bad people and bad things stay out of our country. And that's their primary job, and that's what they're not doing today because the Biden administration, and they will tell you, they have pulled them off that job. And they are processing migrants because the Biden administration has a different view of what border security should be and what the role of those agents should be.
And they're talking about giving more money for the border, and you're like, oh, that's great, till you find out what the money is for. And it's not for actually implementing the policies that would protect Americans. It's basically just clerical nonsense, which I'll let you get to in a minute. But again, either the administration doesn't know what's happening, or they know and they don't care.
They know.
That's a bit. But that's what I'm saying. Either I know it's that they don't care. I'm just saying there are only two things that can be true, and neither one of them are good. That's what I'm trying to get at. Either they don't know and they have no ability to figure this out. They're like, I didn't know tens of millions of people are pouring across the border. I didn't know terrorists are coming across the border. Or they know, but hey, just leave it all open. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, they know. I mean, you just have to listen to Secretary Mayorkas every time he testifies in front of Congress. He'll tell you, we have a plan and we're executing on our plan. It's a common refrain. And that's essentially all you really need to know. If you're a member of Congress or you're anyone else, you're the American people out there going, what the hell's going on? We have a plan and we're executing on our plan. That means everything is by design. Everything is planned out.
Right.
And they are very happy with the execution of that plan. And so that just tells you it's not by circumstance and it's not just something they bundled into. This is where they're going at the end of the day. But I think, again, we've talked about this before, so I don't want to, just continue to beat a dead horse here. But, you got an ongoing humanitarian crisis. You've got an ongoing child trafficking crisis. More children have come across that border. Probably, I haven't looked at the latest numbers, but we're probably close to 400,000. 400,000. I'm not sure what that is as far as, how many you can pack into a Rose Bowl, but I think that's probably three times. Just filling a Rose Bowl up with children who have come across and been trafficked, and why that is not plastered across the front of every. Those are the most vulnerable of our population, and why that doesn't get more airtime. You know, you click on the Today Show, nothing, not one thing about it, and it's heartbreaking.
And I've often said the two kinds of media bias. It takes shape in what you decide to cover, right? So like you said, Today Show doesn't cover it, so they decided not to cover it.
Right.
So you don't know that. And then second is how you cover it. So if they cover it and they say, hey, they're trying to fix everything, Mayorkas has fixed it, he said it's closed, instead of saying it's wide open and known or suspected terrorists are coming, how you cover it's a problem too. That's why it's so frustrating for me too, for the media not being curious, not just about Hunter and Joe Biden, but about this topic itself. All of these things are preventable.
Yeah.
And we know what stops them because the policies we had in place before prevented human trafficking, child smuggling, drugs pouring into our communities, known or suspected terrorists coming across the southern border, people from other countries, not Mexico or the triangle coming up, people from Uzbekistan coming across and then bringing people up. That's a real issue.
Yeah, 100%. So if you go back a couple months to the end of Title 42, right? And then we saw about a 30 to 60 day period where the numbers kind of started to go down, and the administration said, "Hey, it's working." I'll give you an analogy, and then obviously the legacy media said, "Oh, their strategy is working." Well, guess what? The numbers are creeping back up now. Well, let's take those in two parts here. You have the administration saying the numbers are going down. Hogan, it's like if you're an Ole Miss guy. It's like if you know, Ole Miss is giving up 100 points a game in football, and all of a sudden in 2 games they're only giving up about 85. You say, well, I think they're doing a lot better. No, they're still losing. They're still getting their doors blown off, right? And then you have the traditional media say, well, the numbers are going back up. It's like if you went from you're giving up 85 points, you're back to 100 points. No, it's not. They're not creeping up. You're a disaster. You're in disaster land. And that's where we're at, and that's where we've been at. And I just, it's beyond sad. It's getting to the point of comical about how it's covered by the left on the Hill, and of course some of the media. Yeah.
Again, it's a problem that's preventable. It's a problem that has solutions. And when you come into office, as Joe Biden did, and you brag about, I'm doing everything the opposite of the previous administration. Watch me overturn all of these things, executive orders, boom, opening up the border. This is so different. And then it happens. I'm so angry that he just looks around all the time and he acts like these things are just happening to him, but they're happening because of him. I say it all the time, but it's so true. He kind of shrugs it off like, hey, I don't know how to, you can't stop this stuff. You can't produce your own energy. You can't lower taxes. Like, sure you can. You just don't want to do it. Just say you don't want to do it.
It's like they're watching a movie, and you have to remind them, no, you're the characters.
You're the director.
Yeah.
Right.
You are the movie, and you can decide the outcome of the movie instead of just like eating the popcorn and being like,
you
hey.
can yell cut.
Right.
And say, no more people coming across.
Well, good discussion. Really excited for our next guest. Looking forward to this interview.
Absolutely. One of my favorite people at AFPI and one of my favorite folks that I've gotten to know and work with over the years.
Well, I'm thrilled today to be joined by a woman who really needs no introduction. She is the former administrator of the Small Business Administration under President Trump, founder and former CEO of the World Wrestling Entertainment. She is also the chairwoman of AFPI's Center for the American Worker and chair of the board at the America First Policy Institute. Incredibly savvy, smart businesswoman. We're just really, really excited to have Linda McMahon here. Linda, welcome to the Tank.
We got clap for
Linda. Yeah, thank
you.
It's fun to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, we're going to jump right into it. And of course, I mentioned WWE. I think that's where probably a lot of listeners, and you did great at SBA, and people know you about SBA, but they probably also know you from WWE. And you were talking here just before we went live, not only about the unique nature of the business that you built or helped build there, but also how WWE touched lives beyond just the entertainment factor, and how it brought people together. You're talking about the Special Olympics. Maybe if you can just reflect a little bit on how you guys got involved with it, and then kind of some unique nature of building that business. And the Special Olympics story is a great one.
Well, thanks, Chad. It's really wonderful to be able to grow and build a business and be successful, whatever that business is. But WWE's uniqueness is that because it does live events every week all over the country, it goes into the communities. Not only in this country, but it goes into communities around the world. And it gave us a unique opportunity to work with different charity organizations. It gave us a unique opportunity to go and visit hospitals where not only there were children, but also we made many visits to Walter Reed and visited our veterans in many locations. And so all of that was just incredibly wonderful. But then we had many inquiries from Special Olympics and Make-A-Wish Foundation.
Wow.
And so Make-A-Wish Foundation, as you probably know, quite often grants wishes to not just children, but we dealt primarily with children, those who had, diseases that they were not going to recover from.
Right.
And sometimes often their last wish was to come to a WWE event.
Wow.
And I have to tell you, the chill bumps that can give you, when you go in and you see these children, and not all of them were real sick, and some of them have recovered, and that's a wonderful thing. But my first experience was at WrestleMania 1 with Hulk Hogan and Mr. T, and we went in to visit with a young man who was terminally ill. In fact, he only lived a couple of months after WrestleMania. But it was obvious when you saw him. He was in his wheelchair, and, from being sick for so long, just didn't look very healthy at all. His parents were there, and Hulk Hogan was talking to him, and this little boy knew the name of every wrestler. He watched every show.
Wow.
He was all dressed in Hulk Hogan paraphernalia, for the day. And I could see a little tear roll down Hulk Hogan's cheek, and this little boy looked up and he said, "Oh, Hulk, don't cry for me. This is the happiest day of my life to get to be here and to meet you and Mr. T." And Hulk and I both just took a deep breath, and we walked out of the room for a minute and let Mr. T talk to the little boy, because we were so touched. And just to look past this little boy and see his parents, and I thought they must be the bravest people in the world.
That's such an impactful story. And I know, just having known you now for years, to understand something that you created, not just as a cultural impact, but a real impact on people's lives like that, I can't imagine how touching that is. No. When you started something like this for sports entertainment, which we'll get to in a moment, but when you see how it really affects people, what does that do for you, as the founder, the owner?
Well, it's funny. I always said, it's the most selfish thing I ever did, because really, when you go into communities, when you meet with those kind of groups, it really does so much for you and so much for the organization. Right. You actually feel like you've almost been selfish, in doing it. But it's a mutual reward, and just very grateful to have had that opportunity.
Well, I think it's such an interesting point, because I grew up watching wrestling, maybe have gone to a couple of those. But you don't hear about those type of stories. You see the wrestlers, you see the personalities and all the fanfare, but there's something deeper to it as well. And so when you talk about how it affects individuals, I think that's just such a unique nature, and it continues to be, right? WrestleMania continues to be this huge event once a year that continues just to draw just a lot of not only viewership, but people in the seats. And there's something about it. And I don't know if it's like, just it touches you at a personal level and people get invested, but I think it's really unique, and it's spanned decades. So it's not just like something here, it's a fad or anything. It continues to operate. And so it's fascinating. And just to be able to talk to you a little bit about how you built that is just, it's really interesting.
Well, it's very interesting. My husband actually was third generation. His grandfather dabbled a little bit in wrestling, but mostly was a boxing promoter, primarily in New York City. And he was at one of the, I call it the old Madison Square Garden, because I think the Madison Square Garden that exists today, and I may be incorrect on this, but I think it's the 8th Madison Square Garden.
Oh, gosh.
And so Vince's father was there before, and his grandfather. But Vince's dad didn't want my husband to be involved in the promotion business, if you will. He said, "Look, you need to get with a company. You need to get your college degree." And so
Right.
he did. I did all that, but his real love was the wrestling business. So he finally got back into the wrestling business, was an announcer and whatever. And then he and I bought his father's company, Capital Wrestling Corporation, in 1982, and took it from being a regional business to then national and international.
Well, we're going to get into a lot of the policy stuff that you dealt with at small business, but I want to sit here for just a second, if I may. So
I love the fact that you're such a fan, Hogan.
Well, here's the thing. You're my favorite cabinet secretary by far. Okay, Donald Trump, the former.
Whoa.
Well, I'm getting to this. Former President Trump says you're his favorite also, so that's 2 for 2. You're like 8th on Chad's list. He's told me, but that's not the point. You mentioned Hulk Hogan earlier before. You work with Hogan Gidley. Who's the best Hogan?
Well, in different.
Please answer that.
Please.
Well, in different spheres. Hogan Gidley.
All right.
Hogan
That's fair.
Gidley is the greatest comms guy
Okay,
that I've
that's
worked
fair.
with. But
Did you
clearly,
say-
did you
Hulk
say-
Hogan is clearly the best wrestler.
Yeah, well, that's
Did
you never
say
seen me wrestle.
Did you
so I
say
don't think that's
con
fair.
or comms? Con or comms? Comms.
Well, I meant, if I said con, it might have been
Yeah,
a Freudian
con-
slip,
Well-
but I meant comms.
Hulk Hogan's pretty good comms too. Let's be honest; he's a pretty good promoter. But one of the things about the industry, where it wasn't really rating, no one could really measure how many people were watching it, and it's a fascinating story to me because we've talked about it before. But you coined a phrase, if I'm not mistaken, sports entertainment, because people were trying to pigeonhole it as a sport. And you were like, no. Tell us a story about that, because that just fascinates me from a branding, marketing standpoint.
Well, for years, it was called, it was called fake. That all the moves in the
Right.
ring were fake, and way back in the day, that was disputed. And the promoters in the day, talked about, no, this is not fake. This is, you talk about fake. Well, get in the ring with one of these guys and see if you think it's fake. I was actually the first executive to say that it was scripted entertainment, and it was in an interview with the New York Times when we were actually in the state of New Jersey fighting against having our pay-per-view events taxed by the State Athletic Commission. And that was when Governor Christy Todd Whitman was the governor.
Wow.
And so I had to explain we should not have that same tax as any other sporting event because we were sports entertainment. And at one point, the State Athletic Commission had said, well, and this would be regardless of if pay-per-view originated in New Jersey, you wouldn't just pay the live event tax. You'd have to pay tax on all of the revenues from all over, the country. So we got that tax killed.
Low taxes. That's why
That's
I like
it.
it. You see that?
Low taxes.
Always thinking low taxes.
Low
That's great.
taxes, deregulation, that's what grows the economy.
That's great.
Let's shift a little bit to your time at SBA because that was such a big part of the Trump administration. You rebranded it. You focused it on rural development, championing women entrepreneurs, lifting up military veterans, and the like. And we'll ask you a question about all that. But I think the first question is, how did you get there? What was that conversation like with President Trump? I mean, how did you go from where you were to SBA administrator?
Well, it was interesting. It's a little bit of a tie-in back to WWE because that's exactly how we first became associated with Donald Trump. Then before it was President Trump. So I've actually known him about 25, I guess it's been 30 years now. Mm-hmm. But I got a call after he was the president-elect, and he asked me to come to Trump Tower, and I went down, and he said, look, I'd like to ask you to do something. I'd like to ask you to serve as administrator of Small Business Administration. And he said, because I want somebody who's actually run a business and knows about business.
Right.
And knows the
That's
impact
great.
of regulations and taxes, et cetera, on businesses and can go out and visit with those businesses.
What a novel idea.
Yeah, that's what I said to him. I said,
Right.
well, this is really novel.
Right.
So it took me about a nanosecond to say yes, and it was the greatest, one of the greatest honors of my life to serve in the cabinet.
Yeah. So at SBA, I think maybe you were one of the first administrators to visit all 68 of your offices across all 50 states. Mm-hmm. Why did you decide to do that? And sort of what was the big outcome from that?
Well, first of all, SBA is a small agency, within the government. And I felt that 68 district offices was very doable. There was a lot of, I think, confusion at SBA. I wanted clear messaging to come from what my vision was at SBA. I wanted to talk to all of the district directors. I wanted to visit small businesses because I really think that the only way that you can understand the plight, if you will, of small businesses and how they're interacting with SBA and how is SBA interacting with the banks that are bringing the loans to SBA, to guarantee, is to go there and to visit. So it was phenomenal. I got to do some of the most fun things visiting those businesses, but yet the first thing I did, I would go to the SBA office. That they all knew I was coming. I would sit with them. I would talk about what I expected from them. We had clear expectations. I told them I was going to hold them all accountable for those expectations, but I wanted to give them the tools that they needed, to be successful. So it's the first time that kind of outreach had ever been done to the district offices. And we did it in 14 months. So I had a very busy travel schedule. But I did cool things. I was gold mining with one small business.
Did you get to keep what you found?
I did. I brought 2 little nuggets. They're
And
not
they're your
worth a
earrings
whole
right now.
No. I wish I had enough gold from those nuggets. But it was fun. It was really, really fun.
Well,
So I
there's
got to
nothing
do some
like
good things.
there's nothing like visiting, the staff in the field. In this case, in your field offices. And my guess is in probably well over half. This is probably the first time they've had a administrator, SBA
100%.
administrator, come and see their office, much less talk to them.
Yeah, they had never, ever, no administrator did it before. And I haven't been out of office very long, but no one's done it since. So that was, in fact, some of the offices had said, we've never had an administrator come. I'll tell you just one little funny story, not take up too much time. But when I first got into office, I would just randomly call the district office. And someone randomly, I just pick up the phone and call.
That's so good.
And
That's so
and I
scary.
actually did call every district office, but I would just do it on a random basis. But it didn't take very long for word to get around. The administrator's calling. I'd call to see who answered the phone. How did it sound when they called? What kind of service,
Wow.
did that caller get, from SBA? And I kept records of how long it took for the director to get back to me if they hadn't answered the phone. And so we put in different phone systems. We did some really good things, and I'd get questions like, "Is this?" "Yeah, right." I'd say, "Hi, it's Administrator McMahon," and they would go, "Yeah, right. Okay,
Yeah.
who's this really?"
Yeah.
And then you almost hear them go, "Whoa!"
I think that's interesting because in my mind, that is the view of someone who's run a business, right? I'm looking at it from A to Z, from the person who answers it to the policies that we're pursuing to the money that we're giving, everything. I'm looking at the whole business. So that probably, my guess is that shocked them.
Right.
Well, it didn't. And when I first got to SBA, I can't remember now, but there's a government survey that goes around, to all employees.
Feds.
So once a year, thank you.
Yes.
SBA ranked, I think, 3rd from the bottom in satisfaction from employees and would they like to work there or recommend someone else work at SBA. And I said, how does this happen? And when I left, we were like 3 or 4 from the top.
That's huge.
Wow.
So
It's
that was
very
a big,
difficult.
big swing. And it really just was getting in with them, setting their expectations, letting them know what their accountabilities were, and holding them, to that.
You're very tough, but you're also very personable and you're good with people. And I think that matters, obviously, with the job. And that's why I think you're able to turn around that whole SBA system and the mindset of the employees for sure. But some of the things you guys were able to do is where I want to go next. And that is interesting because I'm listening to the current administration saying things like they created 13 million jobs. Well, that's not really true because they shut down the country. All they did was open things back up. In addition, there were still millions of jobs that were available that aren't now, that were available pre-pandemic. So they're still not even close to where things were. But the question becomes, your business acumen, your mindset, what kind of policies did you push? What did you focus on to ensure there were successes with not just an environment so that people could create businesses, because government doesn't create businesses. They create an environment so that businesses can, start up jobs and things like that. But what did you guys do?
Or they kill it.
Or they kill it. That's exactly right.
Very good at that.
So tell us kind of what you did in that position that really kind of opened up the economy.
Honestly, it was taking President Trump's message to small businesses all over the country and talking to them and bringing back the feedback to him, because he was very interested in what small businesses wanted to hear. Were his tax policies on track, the reductions that he was talking about, and to get feedback from them on, regulations that were just choking them. And so that's what I did. I collected that information. I brought it back to him, but helped push his tax policies once I was on the road as well. And I can't think of one small business that I was visiting with who didn't say to me, I would take the savings from tax cuts and what I don't have to spend for regulatory compliance, and I will expand my business. I talked to, and I tell this story a lot, it was a baker outside, a bread baker outside Boston, and he pointed to an area, in his bakery and he said, I'm going with the new tax law, if I can expense this new oven the year in which I buy it. That was a huge thing for small businesses, to be able to expense tools and equipment the same year in which it was bought. He said, I'll buy that oven, I'll put it over here in this space that I've already built. I already have customers who are ready to sign on, and I will hire new employees. And I checked with him about 6 months afterwards, and he had done exactly that. And I heard those kind of stories all over the country. So when you open up businesses, they reinvest in their business, they hire more people, they have more customers, and the economy just flows and grows.
Well, that's one of many, many stories I'm sure that you have. Let's change focus here a little bit and talk about your work at AFPI. Obviously, you've got a couple of different hats. One is leading the Center for the American Worker. And so maybe just talk to us a little bit about what the center's priorities are. And I know that you visited South Dakota here recently, and maybe that's a good prism or sort of view on, because you did a variety of different things there, looking at vocational training and a couple of different priorities for the center. So maybe just walk us through what's the center's focus, what's your focus here at AFPI, and maybe a little insight into that trip.
What's interesting is the Center for the American Worker seems to me it's just kind of a great nexus point from coming from SBA, because really who are in small businesses primarily is the American worker. Now, the American worker can also be at giant companies and corporations, but I think our focus on the American worker is really more on those who are entrepreneurs or who are working in small businesses. And we want to make sure that they have everything that they need, that they have opportunity to work, that they are not being shut out of the marketplace. A lot of them need to be reskilled and retrained now. And I think it dovetails then now in with education.
Right.
So what does the American worker need to do today? Because we do have artificial intelligence coming on board. We do have a lot of automation. And so where do they get their training? How do they get skilled? And for those entering the marketplace for the first time, I'm a strong believer that although I hope that for any profession that needs college and for those students who want to go to college, that they have that opportunity to go. But I don't believe that college is for everyone. While I was in South Dakota, I visited Southeast Tech, where they are doing exactly the things that I was talking about at SBA, and when I was actually running for the Senate in Connecticut, and that is that these technical and vocational schools should work with the business community, find out what's necessary. Right. How can we have programs? And what they're doing at Southeast Tech is they actually have businesses that are coming in for public-private partnerships. They are financing scholarships. They're helping to develop the curriculum so that when those students graduate, they move right in to the marketplace and they are skilled with a job that's going directly into that company.
So the partnerships, public-private, I think, is something that the administration did when you were a part of it that really kind of helped excel or accelerate, I should say, the job markets, the job creation, because you understand, those two entities working together is helpful. So, what would you say is, I guess, the for successful businesses, what's the number one killer of success, and then what's the number one driver of good success? Meaning, or of what's the number one killer of a company, and what's the number one driver of a good company policy wise? Like, if you could say this one thing will really help thrive, and this one thing will really hurt businesses, what would those be?
Well, I think we saw it clearly under the Trump administration. The thing that just opened up the economy was, reduction in taxes. Mm-hmm. And because entrepreneurs, so many of them are in subchapter S corps, there are a lot of them are pass-through corporations or single proprietorships. Those tax cuts really did help them. And as I talked about a little bit before, they reinvested, in their businesses. Let me tell you a story about when I was running for the Senate in Connecticut. It kind of dovetails. I was in one company, and they were a nickel plating company. And I was asking the owner, I said, are you, how often does OSHA come through or some of the other regulatory agencies? And he said, let me tell you this story. He said, and first of all, he said, I need to be regulated. He said, we have caustic chemicals in here. I want to make sure that the ventilation is right. I want to make sure that safety measures are in place. And I welcome that input. He said, I had someone from OSHA come and look, writing up his report, found nothing except the signs on the restroom doors were not regulatory size for men and women.
A little smaller, a little larger.
A little smaller than they needed to be.
Oh, my gosh.
And fined him $5,000. Didn't give him a chance to correct it. I'll be back next month. Fined him $5,000. Now, this fellow said to me, look, $5,000 fine right out of the bottom line. Those are the kinds of stories when you hear about overreach of regulation that just shouldn't happen.
Well, and today you don't need any sign on a bathroom anyway. You just go into whichever one you want. But that's not the point. So that was the number one driver of a good one. But you said the taxes, but the number one killer you think are just higher taxes or the crippling
regulations? And over-regulating small businesses. How many times, did you ever hear, Reagan say or other presidents, just stay out of my way.
Yeah.
Just keep the government out of my way. And
wow, $5,000.
Yeah, $5,000 for.
Well, it's interesting because during obviously the Trump administration, there was a big push by the president and others to reduce the number of regulations. And I remember it was sort of like for every one regulation a department wanted to issue, you had to take down 4 or 5.
Yeah,
right?
he said 2, and it wound up being, I think, almost 8 or more.
It was 20 at one point. It was at one point. It was like 20, but then it ended up settling at like 8.
And so it's not just a good talking point. As someone who ran an agency, and I did for a short period of time, those are, once a rule and a regulation is in place, it's very difficult to remove it. Because you build your business around it, you build, for an agency or department, sometimes you build some of your revenue around it as well. And so to pull that back, it's a difficult thing. And so, I give the president a lot of credit for pushing that.
Absolutely. And, once one regulation is put in place, sort of the opposite of what you were saying, to get rid of it, they won't get rid of it. They'll just amend it, or they'll add something onto it. So now you have a small businesses trying to comply and knew what they were complying with at first, but then now there are all these other things built on top of it. And small businesses don't have a battery of lawyers and accountants, to do all of that and comply. And it's really costly for them.
I think compliance, as you just point out, is such a big problem because it's always changing. So you have to have someone kind of in your business watching out for that, because as you said, you get a $5,000 fine for not having the right bathroom signs that they're not big enough or whatever. So obviously a big problem. Also, when we get off air, don't think I'm not gonna. There was a lot of dead air when I asked you who the best Hogan was, just so we know. She paused for a long time. I'm not gonna let that go. A long time.
So it was good.
She answered it.
I think it's interesting though. We'll bring it back to something that's relevant, Hogan.
No, that's pretty relevant.
Is, the Center for the American Worker. We talk a lot about America First and what does America First mean here at the America First Policy Institute. And so whether you're talking about the border or national security or education policy and all of that, but it's really like the American people and the American worker. And we saw where President Trump made that really a focus of his 4 years in office, whether it was trade deals that benefit the American people and the American worker. And so I think the work that you and the center's doing, Rachel and others that you have there, I think it's just tremendously important, and I think we're going to see, you and the team there just do a lot of great work, I think, in the coming years.
Well, we certainly are looking forward to that. And Rachel, Rachel Oglesby, who is the director now, came from Governor Noem's office in South Dakota.
Wow.
She was the policy director there, and is just doing great work here. And Matt, who is doing a lot of the research and working with other centers as well. But I think we have to look at protecting the American worker, whether or not they are in small business or whether they are working in bigger businesses. I did an op-ed recently on the current administration is looking at giving mandates about electric cars in the future. Well, and the current administration really focuses on wanting to be the real friend of unions in our country. But the mandates that are being put down by the electric cars, if that were to happen, you would put so many workers out of their job in Detroit because it takes far fewer workers to put together an electric car than it does the kind of cars.
You have an op-ed out on this.
That's
Wall
right.
Street Journal, right?
We
in the last
did,
couple of days.
Yeah, we did that op-ed because clearly you're putting people out of work, and I don't hear any programs that they're going to be reskilled or retrained. But that's not being looked at or thought about very much. But that's a big deal.
And a lot of reasons people like that don't understand that is because they don't do what you did, which is going to visit everyone and have these conversations with real people. And I remember when I was working for Mike Huckabee when he was governor, he would make the entire government it was like once a quarter. We went to a particular region in the state and we brought all of our offices, all of our employees, and we sat down and worked with them every day. So we found out for like 2 or 3 days because we found what they were doing and figured out ways to help them.
Sure.
And undergird their efforts, but also get out of the way when they didn't need us. And it was just kind of fascinating to see how those things work. And I think your experiences on the ground when you went to all of these 68 different offices, really kind of helped shape, kind of not just the policy, but also, your mentality on the subject too. And that's why I think it was beneficial.
Yeah, absolutely. And President Trump absolutely believed in apprenticeships. In fact, we set up this entire program, in government and brought in, I forget how many CEOs from all over the country to sit and say, okay, we need for you to help guarantee what kind of programs you're going to put in place, what kind of apprenticeship programs you're going to put in place to help train this next group of American workers. And I believe that the guarantee, after several meetings and getting governors to sign the pledge and state reps to sign the pledges and businesses to sign the pledges, there was a guarantee that 16 million new jobs would be created through apprenticeships. And this was a program that Ivanka Trump really was heavily involved in. I think it was underwritten by the Commerce Department. And I was involved in the program as well. And it was just a very, very strong program that, unfortunately, I don't think is moving forward now, especially at the pace would have. But President Trump clearly understood that small business is the backbone of the economy.
Right.
And that's part of what, we're looking at here, at America First policy, as well as making sure that we are keeping those kind of policies, very strong and making very relevant today to the American worker, the center that I chair. When I was out in South Dakota, it was very interesting. We forget that farmers are small businesses. They can be very big businesses. In fact, corporations have come in and bought, many farms. Yeah. So we have to make sure that those farmers have the most benefit, that they can export, their products. Yeah. I mean, I think the stat was when I was there that last year was the first time that America had imported more food than it exported. Wow. That's a danger signal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We have, we have to make sure that our food is being exported, and that gets into international policy. It gets into the trades document that was done, the treaty that was done with Ambassador Lighthizer, who was the USTR at that point. So very, very important that we understand the policies that really drive what's
important.
happening.
Critically important. Well, we got one last question for you. We've interviewed Brooke Rawlings. We've interviewed a number of folks that are very involved in AFPI. Obviously, you're the chair of the board. So something drew you to AFPI. I'd like you just to comment, like what drew you into the organization, and then maybe take a few minutes to talk about, kind of where you see the organization going, because I think it's unique. It's one thing to hear it from Brooke, who's very passionate about this, but I think you probably have a different perspective.
Actually, it was a call from Brooke
Okay.
that first interested me in AFPI. She gave me a call, and I had met Brooke a couple of times, in cabinet meetings, and that sort of thing during her tenure at the White House. And she called and asked me would I come in and sit and talk with her, let her explain what AFPI was, et cetera. So I did, and we had our first meeting, and I think Jared was part of that meeting. Larry Kudlow was part of that meeting. A couple of others,
Right.
who were there, and really talked about the work of continuing the policy when the Trump administration did not win
Right.
the second term. And so she really whetted my interest, and it was really Brooke's, I think, passion for what she was doing. But not only that, her expertise.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I was not a policy person, and I mean, in a nanosecond, she had whiteboards in the room, and she's drawing all these centers that are going to be part of what we're doing. I had no clue what she was talking about, but she was doing it with such verve, if you will, and she'd done it at Texas Public Policy Foundation. She knew what she was doing. She knew exactly how to do it, and she asked me would I consider serving as chair.
Mm-hmm.
Larry Kudlow was vice chair, and I thought, This is really something that's really important for us to continue. So I was very pleased to accept and to take over, that position, and I think have helped drive it and want to continue to do that. And in fact, I said at our first gala, giving my remarks, I said, I believe that this is some of the most important work I've ever done, because I do believe that we have to take our country back.
Right.
Well, I have to say you're probably the most involved chair of the board that I have ever seen.
Anywhere.
From a policy standpoint, from just meeting with staff to helping run the organization. And so it's such a treat to have your expertise sort of on a daily basis here at AFPI as we're pushing forward that America First agenda at the federal and state level. So thank you for everything that you do.
Well, this is a wonderful organization. I mean, and to have grown in a 2-year period from, 2 or 3 staffers to now we're about 170. We outgrew one office space really quickly. We're on the verge of outgrowing this office space, but I think we are contributing so much for the research and policy development that we're doing, not only for our representatives that are here in Washington, but on the state level as well. This is important work.
Wow.
And we wouldn't be where we are today without your leadership, Linda. It really is true. Your professional career, your public service, and then what I love is the fact that you were able to take that time in an administration and learn so much about the businesses around the country, what they need, what they expect, what they want, whether it's involvement or get out of our way, whatever it was, and kind of use that to shape policy that improves people's lives. It really is impressive, and I'm just blessed every day I get to work with you, for sure.
Well, what a great conversation about the iconic WWE brand, your time as SBA administrator, and then obviously here at AFPI.
Hey,
Thank you.
One more thing.
What you got?
One more thing we were talking about before. Walkout music is very important in the WWE.
Oh.
Do you have a walkout?
Well, it's
song?
called your entrance theme. And even though I was not on television very often, when I did go on television, I was the CEO coming out to sort of lay the law down to someone,
Right.
but occasionally involved in some storyline scripts. So it was fun. And yes, I did have my own music.
Was it like, is it a song we would know, or like it was literally made for you?
Oh no, it was it's composed for me.
Wow,
Ooh.
that's amazing.
That's so good.
If I had that, I'd walk around with a speaker all of the time playing it. Everywhere I walk in this building, I would have it just playing.
That doesn't surprise me.
That's right.
At all.
Well, you know what? That's maybe an idea. I should probably put it on my phone, and then
You should just walk around with it. It'd be great.
Well, Linda, thank you for being
Thanks for having me.
a leading
Really
voice
appreciate it.
for America's workforce, small business, everything that you did and continue to do here at AFPI. So with that, again, thank you for coming on The Tank.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Text the word TANK to 70107. That's TANK to 70107 to get exclusive content from the Tank podcast and to learn more about the America First Policy Institute.